The sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Silver Creek as Penelope Lawson knelt beside her battered trunk, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. It had been 3 days since they'd laid her husband in the cold, unforgiving ground, and the weight of his absence crushed her more than the sweltering heat of the Texas summer of 1878. The stagecoach that had brought her to this desolate town had departed, leaving her alone with nothing but a trunk full of memories and broken promises. "Madam, you can't just stay there all night," the station master had told her before locking up, his voice not unkind but firm with the practicality of frontier life. But where was she to go? Henry's letter had promised a home, a future in this new town. Now he was gone, taken by a fever that swept through the mining camp before she could even reach him. Penelope wiped her eyes with a handkerchief that had long since soaked through. Her black mourning dress clung to her in the heat, the fabric a prison of propriety that did nothing to contain her grief. At 26, she was already a widow, stranded in a town where she knew no one, with barely enough money to last a week. The sound of spurs jingling against wooden planks broke through her thoughts. Heavy boots stopped beside her and a shadow fell across her tear-stained face. "Pardon me, madam, but the last stage left hours ago," a deep voice said from above. Penelope looked up, squinting against the setting sun. A tall man stood before her, his face partially obscured by the brim of his worn cowboy hat. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but even through her tears she could see the kindness in his eyes. "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking. I'm not leaving." The stranger knelt down to her level, concern etched across his weathered face. "You planning on spending the night right here on these boards?" "I don't know what I'm planning anymore," Penelope admitted, clutching her handkerchief tighter. "My husband, he's gone. I just arrived to find he died 3 weeks ago. I have nowhere to go." The man's expression softened. Without a word, he reached for the handle of her trunk and lifted it with ease. "My name's Zachary Tucker, madam. Most folks just call me Zach, and you're coming home with me. I beg your pardon." Penelope gasped, rising to her feet, indignation momentarily overriding her sorrow. "Not like that," Zach quickly clarified, his tanned face reddening slightly beneath his tan. "My sister, Rachel, runs a boarding house just up the way. It's respectable, safe, and she's always saying she could use an extra hand around the place. At least until you figure out your next step." Penelope hesitated, studying the man before her. His eyes were the color of the sky just after a storm, and despite his rough appearance, there was nothing threatening in his manner. Just the opposite, he exuded a calm steadiness that seemed as solid as the mountains in the distance. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Tucker," she said finally, her chin lifting with what little pride she had left. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "It ain't charity if you work for your keep, and please call me Zach." He shifted the trunk to his other hand. "Now, you coming, or would you prefer the company of scorpions tonight? They tend to get friendly once the sun goes down." Despite herself, Penelope felt a small smile form. "When you put it that way, Mr. Tucker Zach, I suppose I don't have much choice." She gathered her skirts and followed him down the dusty street, away from the stagecoach station, and toward whatever uncertain future awaited her. Rachel Tucker's boarding house stood 2 stories tall at the end of the main street, its whitewashed exterior a stark contrast to the dusty buildings surrounding it. A wooden sign swung gently in the evening breeze. "Tucker's Lodging, clean beds, hot meals." As they approached, a woman with the same storm blue eyes as Zach appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. "Zachary Tucker, if you've brought another stray dog home, I swear," her words cut off when she spotted Penelope trailing behind him. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Rachel, this is Mrs." Zach paused, glancing back at Penelope with a question in his eyes. "Lawson," Penelope supplied. "Penelope Lawson. Mrs. Lawson needs a place to stay," Zach explained, setting the trunk down on the porch. "Her husband passed before she arrived in town." Understanding immediately softened Rachel's features. "Oh, you poor dear, come in, come in." She ushered Penelope through the door, casting a grateful look at her brother. "I just put on a pot of stew, and there's fresh bread too." The interior of the boarding house was simple but meticulously clean. A large common room with several tables served as a dining area, with a hallway leading to what Penelope presumed were guest rooms. A staircase curved up to the second floor, and the smell of cooking food wafted from a doorway that must have led to the kitchen. "Thank you for your kindness," Penelope said, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. "But I can't impose nonsense," Rachel interrupted gently. "We'll get you settled in the blue room. It's small but has a lovely view of the mountains. And tomorrow, when you've had some rest, we can talk about what comes next." Zach set her trunk down at the foot of the stairs. "Rachel's the best cook in 3 counties," he said with obvious pride. "You're in good hands here." "And where will you go?" Penelope found herself asking, surprising herself with how much she wanted him to stay. "I've got a small ranch about 2 miles outside of town," he explained. "I was just in to pick up some supplies when I saw you at the station." "Zach practically built this place," Rachel added, squeezing her brother's arm affectionately. "After our parents died, he made sure I had somewhere safe to call home." Penelope felt a pang of longing. Home. She'd left her childhood home in Boston to marry Henry, a man she'd known for barely 6 months before he headed west to make his fortune. She'd waited 2 years before receiving his letter saying he'd established himself enough to send for her. Now here she was, a widow before she'd even had a chance to be a proper wife. "I'll come by tomorrow to check on you," Zach promised, setting his hat back on his head. "Rachel will take good care of you tonight." As he turned to leave, Penelope caught his arm. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes meeting his. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." Something passed between them then, a momentary connection that neither could explain. Zach nodded, his expression solemn. "Get some rest, Mrs. Lawson. Tomorrow's another day." After he left, Rachel showed Penelope to her room, a small but tidy space with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that would indeed offer a view of the mountains when daylight returned. "The washroom is at the end of the hall," Rachel explained. "There are currently 3 other boarders, all men but respectable ones. A schoolteacher, a clerk from the mercantile, and an elderly gentleman who used to prospect but now just tells stories about his glory days." "Thank you," Penelope said again, sinking onto the bed. "I can pay for a week's lodging, but after that." Rachel waved her concern away. "We'll figure something out. I've been needing help around here anyway. Can you cook?" "Not as well as I should," Penelope admitted, "but I'm a quick learner." "And sewing, cleaning." "Both of those I can manage quite well," Rachel nodded, satisfied. "Then we already have the beginnings of an arrangement. Now wash up and come down for some supper." Food always helps clear the mind. Left alone, Penelope finally allowed herself to feel the full scope of her situation. She was a widow, alone in a strange town, with limited funds and no clear path forward. And yet, for the first time since receiving the terrible news about Henry, she felt a tiny flicker of hope. These strangers had shown her more kindness in an hour than she'd experienced in months. As she washed her face in the cool water from the pitcher, Penelope studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Grief had hollowed her cheeks, and dark circles shadowed her green eyes. Her chestnut hair, once her pride, hung limply around her face, escaping from the hasty bun she'd fashioned that morning. "What now, Penny?" she whispered to herself, using the nickname her father had given her long ago. The woman in the mirror offered no answers, but as Penelope changed into her one clean dress, a summer gray that was at least cooler than her black morning attire, she made a decision. She would give herself 1 week to mourn, to recover from her journey, and then she would find a way forward. She had to. There was no going back. Downstairs, Rachel had set a place for her at a small table near the kitchen. The other boarders looked up curiously when she entered, but politely returned to their meals after Rachel made brief introductions. The stew was indeed delicious, rich with beef and vegetables, served with fresh bread still warm from the oven. "Your brother mentioned you might need help around here," Penelope said as Rachel joined her with her own bowl. "I'd like to earn my keep starting tomorrow." Rachel studied her for a moment. "Are you sure? There's no rush, I'm sure," Penelope said firmly. "Work will help keep my mind occupied." Well, if you insist, I could use help with the laundry. It's my least favorite chore, especially in this heat. Consider it done. As they continued their meal, Rachel shared stories about Silver Creek and its inhabitants. The town had grown considerably in the past 5 years, first with the silver mines and then with cattle ranching. Zach had arrived early, claiming land and building it into one of the most successful small ranches in the area. He works too hard, Rachel said with a sigh. Barely takes time for himself. I've been trying to find him a wife for years, but he's stubborn as a mule. Penelope felt her cheeks warm and quickly took another spoonful of stew. How long have you run this boarding house? Going on 4 years now. Zach bought the building when it was just a rundown old saloon, said a respectable town needed respectable lodgings. Rachel smiled at the memory. He and some of the ranch hands rebuilt it practically from the ground up. I was teaching at the time, but he insisted this would be a better business. He was right, as usual. By the time Penelope retired to her room, exhaustion had overtaken her. She fell asleep almost immediately, her dreams a confused jumble of stagecoaches, open graves, and a pair of kind blue eyes that somehow made her feel less alone. Morning came with the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of coffee wafting up the stairs. Penelope dressed quickly in her gray dress again, mentally calculating how long she could go before needing to wash her limited wardrobe. As a banker's daughter turned banker's wife, she'd never had to consider such practical matters before. Rachel was already bustling about the kitchen when Penelope came downstairs. "Good morning. Did you sleep well? There's coffee on the stove and biscuits just came out of the oven." "I slept better than I have in weeks," Penelope admitted, accepting a steaming cup gratefully. "Now about that laundry." The day passed in a blur of domestic activity. Penelope threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. She helped Rachel wash sheets and towels, hanging them to dry in the hot sun behind the house. Later, she assisted with preparing lunch for the boarders, chopping vegetables for a simple stew that would simmer until evening. In the afternoon, while Rachel went to purchase supplies from the mercantile, Penelope swept the porch and common areas. The physical labor was unfamiliar but oddly satisfying. Each completed task gave her a small sense of accomplishment, something tangible to focus on beyond her grief. She was arranging fresh wildflowers in a jar on the dining table when the front door opened, and Zach stepped inside. He'd clearly cleaned up since yesterday. His clothes were less dusty, and his dark hair was damp, as if recently washed. "Mrs. Lawson," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I see Rachel's put you to work already." "At my insistence," Penelope clarified, "and please call me Penelope." "Penelope," he repeated, the name sounding different in his deep voice. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," she said honestly. "Your sister has been very kind. That's Rachel for you. Heart bigger than Texas itself." He glanced around. "Is she here?" She went to the mercantile. "She should be back soon." Zach nodded, then reached into his pocket. "I spoke with Sheriff Mills this morning. He confirmed what you said about your husband. I'm sorry for your loss." Penelope swallowed hard, arranging the flowers with more focus than necessary. "Thank you." "The sheriff also mentioned that your husband left some belongings at the mining office. I thought you might want to claim them." Penelope's hands stilled. "I didn't know. Thank you for finding out." "I can take you there tomorrow if you'd like," Zach offered. "It's about an hour's ride from town." The thought of riding with this man she barely knew should have made Penelope uneasy, but instead she felt only gratitude. "That would be very helpful, thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Zach shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his hat still in his hands. "Rachel also mentioned you might be looking for more permanent work." "I am," Penelope confirmed. "I can't impose on your sister's generosity forever. Well, as it happens, I might have a proposition for you." Zach cleared his throat. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, is leaving next month to live with her daughter in California. I'll be needing someone to cook and keep house at the ranch." Penelope blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a position as your housekeeper." "It would be proper," he hastened to add. "The ranch house is large and there are always hands around. You'd have your own quarters, of course. The pay is fair and you'd get 1 day off each week." Before Penelope could respond, the front door opened again and Rachel entered, arms laden with packages. "Zach, I thought I might see you today." She set her purchases down and gave her brother a quick hug. "Have you been talking poor Penelope's ear off about that ranch of yours?" "Actually, he was offering me a position," Penelope said, "as his housekeeper." Rachel's eyebrows shot up. "Was he now?" She gave her brother a look that Penelope couldn't quite interpret. "Well, that's interesting timing. Mrs. Winters is leaving," Zach said defensively. "You know that." "Not for another month," Rachel pointed out, "and you've never been in a rush to replace staff before." Zach's ears reddened slightly. "I thought Mrs. Lawson Penelope might appreciate knowing she has options." Rachel looked from her brother to Penelope and back again, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Options are always good. Why don't you stay for supper, Zach? I'm sure Penelope has questions about this position." "I wouldn't want to impose," he began. "Nonsense," Rachel interrupted. "Penelope made an apple pie this afternoon that would put our mothers to shame." Now it was Penelope's turn to blush. "It's nothing special, just something to repay your hospitality." "I never turn down pie," Zach said with a smile that transformed his serious face. "If you're sure it's no trouble." "None at all," Rachel assured him, already bustling toward the kitchen. "Penelope, would you mind setting an extra place at the table? I'll go check on that stew." Left alone again with Zach, Penelope felt suddenly self-conscious. "Your offer is very kind," she said, moving to the cabinet where Rachel kept the dishes. "But I should tell you that I have limited experience as a housekeeper. I wouldn't want to disappoint you." "Rachel says you're a quick learner," Zach replied, watching as she set plates on the table. "And Mrs. Winters would have time to show you the routine before she leaves." He paused, then added more softly, "Everyone deserves a fresh start, Penelope. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns." Something in his tone made her look up, really seeing him for perhaps the first time. There was a sadness in his eyes that matched her own, a knowledge of loss that went beyond mere sympathy. "You've had your share of unexpected turns too, I think," she observed. Zach's expression remained steady, but something flickered in his eyes. "Life out here has a way of teaching hard lessons." Before she could ask what he meant, Rachel called from the kitchen, and the moment passed. The evening progressed pleasantly, with the other boarders joining them for a supper that was more festive than Penelope had anticipated. Rachel had a gift for making everyone feel at ease, drawing out conversation and laughter even from the normally quiet schoolteacher. Throughout the meal, Penelope found her gaze repeatedly drawn to Zach. He spoke little, but when he did, others listened. It was clear he was respected in the community, and the way he interacted with his sister, teasing her gently, but with obvious affection, revealed a tenderness that belied his rugged exterior. As the evening wound down and the boarders excused themselves one by one, Zach finally rose to leave as well. "I'll come by around 9 tomorrow," he told Penelope, "for the ride to the mining office. I'll be ready," she promised. After he left, Penelope helped Rachel clear the table and wash the dishes. The two women worked in companionable silence for a while before Rachel spoke. "You should take the job, you know." Penelope looked up from the plate she was drying. "You think so?" "Zach's a good man," Rachel said, scrubbing a pot with more vigor than necessary. "The best I know, he wouldn't offer if he didn't think it would work out well for both of you." "I barely know him," Penelope pointed out, "or this town for that matter." "Sometimes the best decisions are the ones we make with our instincts, not our careful planning." Rachel rinsed the pot and handed it to Penelope. "When our parents died in that influenza epidemic, Zach was just 21, I was 17. He could have sent me back east to our aunt, but he didn't. He said, 'We're staying together, Ratch. I promised Pa, and he's never broken that promise, even when it would have been easier for him.'" Penelope considered this as she dried the pot. "What about you? Would you be all right if I left to work for your brother?" Rachel laughed. "I managed this place on my own before you arrived, remember? Besides, I have my eye on a girl from church who's looking for work. Her name's Emily, and she's a much better cook than I am." "Better than me too, I suspect," Penelope said with a small smile. "Don't sell yourself short." "That pie was divine." Rachel hung up her dishcloth to dry. "Just promise me one thing." What's that? Be patient with Zach. He can be as stubborn as they come and about as communicative as a fence post when he's got something on his mind, but his heart's in the right place. Penelope nodded, wondering why Rachel seemed to be giving her advice that went beyond a simple employment relationship. I'll remember that. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant howl of a coyote, Penelope thought about Zach's offer. Taking a position as his housekeeper would give her time to figure out her next steps. She could save money, learn about the area, and perhaps eventually find a way to support herself independently. It was a practical solution to her immediate problems. So why did the thought of it make her heart beat a little faster? And why could she not stop thinking about those storm blue eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed composure? It's just gratitude, she whispered to herself in the darkness. Nothing more. But as sleep finally claimed her, Penelope knew she was lying to herself. There was something about Zachary Tucker that called to her, something that made her feel both unsettled and strangely at peace. And tomorrow, she would be alone with him for hours as they rode to the mining office to collect the last remnants of her husband's life. Morning dawned clear and bright, with a hint of coolness that would burn off by midday. Penelope dressed with extra care in her gray dress, which Rachel had kindly pressed for her the night before. She braided her hair and coiled it at the nape of her neck, then added a simple bonnet to protect her face from the sun. Zach arrived precisely at 9, riding a handsome chestnut gelding and leading a smaller, dappled mare. He dismounted smoothly, tying both horses to the hitching post in front of the boarding house. "Good morning," he greeted her, once again removing his hat. "I hope the mare will be suitable." "She belongs to Rachel, but she doesn't ride much these days." "She's lovely," Penelope said, approaching the gentle-looking horse. "It's been a while since I've ridden, but I learned as a girl. She's steady and sweet-tempered," Zach assured her, offering his hand to help her mount. Penelope hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, his grip firm but gentle as he helped her into the saddle. For a moment, their eyes met, and that strange connection flared between them again. "Thank you," she murmured, quickly looking away to adjust her skirts. Zach cleared his throat and mounted his own horse. "The mining office is about an hour north near the foothills. The road is decent, but let me know if you need to rest." The first part of their journey passed in comfortable silence. Penelope found her riding skills returning quickly, and she relaxed into the rhythm of the mare's steady gait. The landscape spread out around them, rolling plains giving way to more rugged terrain as they approached the foothills. Wildflowers dotted the grasslands, painting splashes of color against the green and gold backdrop. "It's beautiful," Penelope commented as they paused to let the horses drink from a small stream. "Different from what I expected." "What did you expect?" Zach asked, dismounting to stretch his legs. "More desert, I suppose, less life," she gestured to the vibrant scene around them. "Texas has a bit of everything," Zach said, helping her down from her horse. "Desert to the west, forests to the east, plains and hills in between. My land is about 10 miles west of town, good grazing country with a year-round creek running through it." "How did you end up here?" Penelope asked, curious about this man who had so unexpectedly become her benefactor. Zach's expression grew distant. "My father brought us west after the war. He fought for the Union, which didn't make him popular back in Kentucky. He said he wanted a fresh start where a man would be judged by his actions, not his past." He bent to pick up a small stone, turning it over in his hands. "He was a good man, taught me everything I know about ranching." "Rachel mentioned you lost both your parents to influenza." Zach nodded, his jaw tightening. 8 years ago, bad outbreaks swept through the area, took a lot of good people." "I'm sorry," Penelope said softly. "Losing those we love leaves holes that never quite fill in." "No," Zach agreed, looking at her with understanding. "They don't." He tossed the stone into the stream, watching the ripples spread. "What about you? Where were you before coming here?" "Boston," Penelope replied. "My father was a banker, very proper, very concerned with appearances." She smiled at a memory. He nearly had an apoplexy when Henry proposed. A mining engineer was not what he had in mind for his only daughter. "But you married him anyway." "I did," Penelope's smile faded. Henry was charming, full of dreams and plans. He painted such a vivid picture of the life we would have once he struck it rich. She shook her head. I was naive enough to believe him. Dreams aren't always foolish, Zach said. Sometimes they're all that keeps us going. Penelope looked at him curiously. Do you have dreams, Mr. Tucker? A hint of a smile touched his lips. I thought we agreed on Zach. Zach, she corrected herself, finding she liked the way his name felt on her tongue. I dream of building something that lasts, he said after a moment. Something I can pass on. He glanced at her, then quickly away. We should keep moving if we want to make it back before dark. They remounted and continued their journey, crossing into more rugged terrain as they approached the mining camp. Unlike the bustling town of Silver Creek, the camp had a temporary feel to it, a collection of rough wooden structures clustered around the entrance to a mine shaft that burrowed into the hillside. The mining office turned out to be little more than a shack with a crude sign nailed above the door. Inside, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers looked up from a ledger as they entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyeing them with mild curiosity. "This is Mrs. Lawson," Zach explained. "Her husband, Henry Lawson, passed away here about a month ago." Sheriff Mills said he left some belongings. Recognition dawned on the clerk's face. Ah, yes, the engineer from back east. Terrible business, that fever. He rose from his desk and moved to a stack of crates in the corner. We've been holding his things, hoping family would claim them. He pulled out a small wooden box and a leather satchel, placing them on the desk. This is all he had in his quarters, his personal effects, some papers. There's also this. He reached into a drawer and withdrew a small canvas pouch that clinked when he set it down, his final wages. Not much, I'm afraid. Penelope stared at the items, these last tangible connections to her husband. With trembling hands, she reached for the leather satchel first. Inside were engineering tools, a few books, and a bundle of letters tied with string. Her letters, she realized, recognizing her own handwriting. The wooden box contained a pocket watch, a straight razor, and a small daguerreotype of herself that she had sent to him the previous Christmas. At the bottom of the box lay a simple gold wedding band, his wedding band, which she had placed on his finger 3 years ago in her father's parlor. "He wasn't wearing this when he died?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "I wouldn't know, madam." The doctor would have collected his personal items. Zach's hand came to rest lightly on her shoulder. "Would you like a moment alone?" Penelope nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Zach stepped outside with the clerk, leaving her to sort through these remnants of her marriage in private. With shaking fingers, she untied the bundle of letters. There were 12 in all, every letter she had sent him since they had parted. Each had been carefully opened and refolded, some so frequently that the paper was beginning to wear thin at the creases. Whatever else Henry had been, he had treasured her words. At the bottom of the stack, she found a letter she didn't recognize unopened, addressed to her in Henry's bold handwriting. The postmark showed it had been sent just 3 days before his death. Penelope sank into the clerk's chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. Breaking the seal, she unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Penelope, by the time you receive this, you will already be on your journey west, and I cannot express how eagerly I await your arrival. These years without you have been longer than I could have imagined, but I kept my promise. I have established myself here and can finally offer you the home you deserve. I must confess something that I hope you will forgive. The mining venture has not been as profitable as I led you to believe in my earlier letters. The silver is here, but extracting it has proven more challenging than anticipated. I did not want to worry you or give your father more reason to doubt my ability to provide for you. However, fortune has smiled upon us in an unexpected way. Using my engineering skills, I have designed improvements to the extraction process that the mining company has agreed to implement. In exchange, they have granted me a percentage of the increased yield. The first payments should arrive shortly after you do. I have already purchased land outside of town where we will build our home, a real home, Penny, not a mining camp shack. I walk the property often, imagining you there, imagining the family we will create together. 3 years is too long to be apart from one's heart. I promise we will never be separated again. With all my love, Henry. Tears flowed freely down Penelope's cheeks as she finished reading. Henry had died just days before she arrived, never knowing that his plans for their future would remain unfulfilled, that the land he had purchased would never see the home he had imagined. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her grief. Zach poked his head in, concern evident in his expression. "Penelope, are you all right?" She wiped her tears with her handkerchief and nodded, though she knew she was far from all right. "I found a letter from Henry. He wrote it just before he died." Zach entered fully, closing the door behind him. "What did it say, if you don't mind my asking?" "He bought land," Penelope said, holding up the letter. "Somewhere outside of town he was going to build us a home." Fresh tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "He never told me where, and now—" "We can find out," Zach said gently. Property records would be at the county clerk's office in Silver Creek. If he purchased land legally, there will be documentation. Hope flickered briefly in Penelope's chest, then faded. What good would it do? I couldn't possibly build a house on my own, and even if I could, what then? A woman alone on a piece of empty land, she shook her head. It was just another of Henry's dreams that wasn't meant to be. Zach was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Dreams can change shape," he said finally, "but that doesn't mean they have to die." Penelope carefully refolded the letter and placed it with the others in the satchel. She gathered the rest of Henry's belongings, including the pouch of wages, which felt heavier than she had expected. "I'm ready to go," she said, suddenly eager to leave this place where her husband had spent his final days. Outside, the clerk was waiting with one last item, a certificate of death signed by the camp doctor. Penelope took it without comment, tucking it into the satchel with the letters. Another piece of paper to mark the end of a life, the end of a dream. The ride back to Silver Creek was quieter than the journey out. Penelope was lost in thoughts of what might have been, while Zach seemed content to give her the space she needed to process her grief. It wasn't until they were about halfway back, resting again by the stream, that he broke the silence. "My offer still stands," he said as he helped her down from her horse. "The housekeeper position at the ranch, no pressure to decide now, but I wanted you to know." Penelope gazed out at the rolling landscape, thinking of Henry's letter and the land he had purchased somewhere in this vast country. Land that was technically hers now, though she had no idea where it was or what to do with it. "Thank you," she said finally. I think I would like to accept your offer." Relief and something else, something that looked almost like happiness, flashed across Zach's face. "You won't regret it," he promised. "It's hard work, but honest work, and my ranch hands are good men. When would you want me to start?" "Mrs. Winters won't leave for another month, as Rachel pointed out," Zach said with a wry smile. "But you could come out next week, get to know the place, start learning the routine. There's plenty of room." Penelope nodded, feeling as if she had just taken a step onto a path that would lead her away from her grief and toward something new. Next week, then. They remounted and continued their journey back to Silver Creek, arriving just as the sun was beginning to set. Rachel was waiting on the porch of the boarding house, worry etched on her face. "There you are. I was starting to think something had happened." "Just took longer at the mining office than expected," Zach explained, helping Penelope dismount. Rachel's eyes widened at the sight of the satchel and box Penelope carried. "You found his things then?" "Yes," Penelope confirmed. "And a letter. He had purchased land, Rachel. He was going to build us a home." "Oh, Penelope," Rachel said softly, drawing her into a hug. "I'm so sorry." Over Rachel's shoulder, Penelope met Zach's gaze. "I've accepted your brother's offer," she told Rachel. "I'll be starting at the ranch next week." Rachel pulled back, looking from Penelope to Zach with raised eyebrows. "Will you now? Well, that's wonderful news." A knowing smile played at her lips. Zach could certainly use a woman's touch around that place. "Rachel," Zach warned, his ears reddening again. "What? It's true. The ranch house is lovely, but it needs someone who cares about more than just functionality." Rachel linked her arm through Penelope's. "Come inside, you must be exhausted and supper is almost ready." As they moved toward the door, Zach called after them. "I'll come by next week then." Tuesday morning, Penelope turned back, meeting his steady gaze. Tuesday would be perfect. "Thank you again, Zach." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a promise of sorts. Penelope couldn't quite name it, but as she followed Rachel inside, she felt a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. That night, after a quiet supper with Rachel and the other boarders, Penelope sat on her bed and carefully went through Henry's belongings again. The pocket watch still ticked, marking time as it had for its owner until his last days. The wedding band gleamed in the lamplight, a circle with no beginning and no end, just like the vows they had exchanged. Among the papers in the satchel, she found notes on mining techniques, sketches of machinery and financial records that confirmed what Henry had written in his letter. The mining venture had indeed struggled, but his innovations appeared to have turned things around. There were also several bank drafts made out to Henry, the first payments for his percentage of the increased yield, just as he had predicted. The amounts were substantial, far more than Penelope had expected. Combined with the wages in the pouch, she had enough to live comfortably for quite some time, perhaps even enough to build the house Henry had planned if she could find the land. Yet despite this unexpected financial security, Penelope found herself still drawn to the idea of working at Zach's ranch. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about finding a purpose, a place to belong in this new world she had entered. And if she was being honest with herself, it was also about the man who had picked up her trunk and told her she was coming home when she'd been at her lowest point. "I hardly know him," she reminded herself as she carefully repacked Henry's belongings, "and I'm still in mourning." But as she extinguished the lamp and lay in the darkness, Penelope knew that life had a way of moving forward, whether one was ready or not. And for the first time since learning of Henry's death, she found herself looking toward the future with something that felt remarkably like hope. The week passed quickly, filled with work at the boarding house and preparations for her move to the ranch. Rachel helped her wash and press her few dresses and offered advice about ranch life based on her own experiences growing up. "The days start early," she warned. "And the work never really ends, but there's a rhythm to it that becomes comforting after a while." On Monday afternoon, Penelope walked to the county clerk's office to inquire about Henry's land purchase. The clerk, a harried-looking man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, searched through the property records while Penelope waited. Lawson," he muttered, flipping through pages. "Ah, here we are." Henry Lawson purchased 120 acres from Jeremiah Wilson on April 18th of this year, paid in full. He adjusted his spectacles. Location is approximately 7 miles northwest of town, bordering Tucker Creek. Penelope's heart skipped a beat. "Did you say Tucker Creek?" The clerk nodded, scanning the document. "Yes, it's noted here as the eastern boundary of the property. The western boundary is marked by a ridgeline known locally as Wilson's Spine." Is there any relation to Zachary Tucker's ranch?" Penelope asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The clerk frowned, consulting another ledger. "Tucker's property is extensive, one of the largest spreads in the county, according to this." He traced his finger down a column of figures. "Yes, it appears this parcel would be adjacent to the eastern portion of Tucker's ranch." Penelope thanked the clerk, her mind racing as she left the office. Henry had purchased land right next to Zach's ranch land that she now owned. It seemed too coincidental, yet she couldn't imagine how Henry would have known to buy property there specifically. Perhaps it had simply been the best available land at the time. She debated whether to mention this discovery to Zach when he came to collect her the next day. Would it change things between them? Would he think she had accepted his job offer under false pretenses? The land changed her circumstances significantly. She was no longer a destitute widow in need of employment, but a landowner with means to support herself. Yet the thought of not going to the ranch, of not seeing Zach daily, left an unexpected emptiness in her chest. Their interactions had been brief, but had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. "I'll tell him," she decided as she walked back to the boarding house. "Tomorrow, when the time is right." Tuesday dawned clear and cool, with a hint of autumn in the air despite the summer heat that would come later in the day. Penelope dressed in her most practical attire, a simple blue dress with a white collar, sturdy enough for work but still presentable. Rachel helped her carry her trunk downstairs, where it sat waiting by the door. The other boarders had already left for their respective jobs, leaving the two women alone in the common room. "You'll come visit, won't you?" Penelope asked as they waited for Zach to arrive. "Try and keep me away," Rachel laughed. "Someone has to make sure my brother isn't working you to death." Her expression softened, "But I don't think that will be a problem. Zach may seem gruff at times, but he's got a kind heart." "I know," Penelope said quietly. "I've seen it." Rachel studied her for a moment, then nodded with apparent satisfaction. "You're good for him, I think, even if neither of you realizes it yet." Before Penelope could respond to this cryptic statement, the sound of wagon wheels on the street announced Zach's arrival. Rachel hurried to the window. "Right on time, as always," she said with a smile. "And he's brought the good wagon, not just the supply cart, making an impression, I see." Penelope felt a flutter of nerves as Zach's tall figure appeared in the doorway. He removed his hat as he entered, his eyes immediately finding hers. "Good morning," he greeted them both, though his gaze lingered on Penelope. "Ready for ranch life, as ready as I'll ever be," she replied with a small smile. Rachel hugged her tightly. "Remember, if it doesn't work out, you always have a place here." "Thank you for everything," Penelope whispered, returning the embrace. Zach loaded her trunk into the wagon while Penelope said her final goodbyes to Rachel. Then he helped her up onto the seat beside him, his hands strong and sure as he lifted her. As they pulled away from the boarding house, Penelope felt a strange mixture of excitement and apprehension. She was leaving behind the last connection to her old life and embarking on something entirely new. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch," Zach told her as they left the town behind. "Longer with the wagon, but the road is decent." Penelope nodded, gathering her courage. "Zach, there's something I need to tell you." He glanced at her, curiosity in his eyes. "What is it?" "Yesterday, I went to the county clerk's office to find out about the land Henry purchased." She took a deep breath. "It's 120 acres bordering the eastern edge of your ranch along Tucker Creek." Zach's hands tightened on the reins, his expression unreadable. "Is that so?" "I had no idea when I accepted your offer," Penelope hastened to add. "I wanted you to know that my circumstances have changed somewhat. The land, combined with some bank drafts I found among Henry's papers, I'm not as destitute as I appeared when we first met." Zach was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Finally, he spoke, his voice carefully neutral. "Does this mean you've changed your mind about working at the ranch?" "No," Penelope said quickly. "Not at all, unless you'd prefer I didn't now that you know." Zach turned to look at her then, his blue eyes intense. "I still want you to come," he said simply. "The offer wasn't made out of pity." Penelope, relief washed over her. "Then I still accept, gladly," he nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Good." He returned his attention to the road, but the tension had left his shoulders. "That parcel your husband bought, it's good land. Prime grazing with reliable water from the creek year-round. He chose well." "What do you think I should do with it?" Penelope asked, genuinely curious about his opinion. Zach considered the question. "Depends on what you want." "You could sell it. Land values are rising with the railroad coming through next year. You could lease it for grazing. Or," he hesitated, "or what? Or you could do what your husband planned, build a home there, maybe even work the land yourself with hired help." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. A woman running a ranch, is that even possible? Difficult, Zach admitted. But not impossible. There's a widow about 30 miles south who's been running her late husband's cattle operation for 5 years now. Tough as nails, that one, but she's made it work. Penelope tried to imagine herself in such a role and found the image didn't seem as far-fetched as it might have a week ago. "I'll need to think about it," she said finally. "For now, I'm content to learn what I can from you and Mrs. Winters." Zach nodded, seeming pleased with her answer. No rush to decide. The land isn't going anywhere. The remainder of the journey passed pleasantly, with Zach pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. As they crested a gentle rise, he pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said, gesturing ahead. Tucker Ranch. Penelope gasped softly at the vista before her. The ranch sprawled across a verdant valley with a large two-story house situated on a slight elevation overlooking corrals, barns, and outbuildings. A creek, Tucker Creek, she presumed, wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. In the distance, cattle grazed on rolling pastureland that stretched toward the horizon. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Took 10 years to build it to this," Zach said, pride evident in his voice. "Started with just 50 acres and a dozen head of cattle. Now it's over 2,000 acres and nearly 500 head. You've accomplished a great deal," Penelope said, genuinely impressed. "Had good help," Zach replied modestly. "And a lot of luck." He flicked the reins and the wagon began moving again, descending into the valley toward the ranch house. As they approached, Penelope noticed details she hadn't been able to see from a distance. The house was constructed of sturdy timber with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Flower beds, somewhat neglected but still showing signs of careful planning, bordered the front of the house. A large oak tree dominated one side of the yard, with a wooden swing hanging from one of its massive branches. Several men were working in the nearby corrals, breaking from their tasks to wave as the wagon passed. Zach returned their greetings with a raised hand. "That's Hank and Lewis breaking the new horses," he explained. "The older fellow by the barn is Emmett. He's been with me since the beginning. You'll meet the rest at supper." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and before Zach could descend, the front door opened to reveal a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "About time you got back," she called, wiping her hands on her apron as she came down the porch steps. "Beans are threatening to boil over, and I can't be in 2 places at once." "Mrs. Winters, this is Mrs. Lawson," Zach said as he helped Penelope down from the wagon. "She'll be taking over when you leave." Mrs. Winters gave Penelope a thorough once-over, her expression stern but not unkind. "City girl by the look of you," she observed. "Ever cooked for 15 hungry men after a day of branding?" "No," Penelope admitted, "but I'm willing to learn." A hint of approval flickered in the older woman's eyes. "Willing counts for more than knowing, in my experience. Come inside, then." "Might as well start now. Lunch is in an hour." Zach carried Penelope's trunk into the house while Mrs. Winters led her through the front door. The interior was spacious and surprisingly well-appointed, with solid furniture, polished wood floors, and large windows that filled the rooms with light. "This is the main parlor," Mrs. Winters explained, gesturing to a comfortable-looking room with a stone fireplace. "Not used much except in winter or when there's company. Through there is the dining room, big enough for all the hands during roundup. Kitchen's back here." The kitchen was a large, warm space dominated by a massive iron stove and a long wooden table that could easily seat a dozen. Pots bubbled on the stovetop, filling the air with savory aromas. "You'll sleep in the room off the kitchen," Mrs. Winters continued, pointing to a door in the corner. "It's small but private. The men sleep in the bunkhouse out back, except for Zach, of course. His room's upstairs, along with the guest rooms." Penelope nodded, trying to absorb all the information at once. It was overwhelming, but exciting too. This would be her home for the foreseeable future, and despite the circumstances that had brought her here, she found herself eager to begin. Zach appeared in the kitchen doorway, setting down her trunk. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Winters' capable hands," he said. "I need to check on the north pasture. Won't be back until supper. Mrs. Winters will show you around and get you settled." "Thank you," Penelope said, suddenly conscious of how different their relationship would be now that she was his employee. "I appreciate the opportunity." Something flickered in Zach's eyes, a warmth that belied the formality of their exchange. "Welcome to Tucker Ranch, Penelope," he said softly. Then he was gone, leaving her to begin her new life under Mrs. Winters' watchful eye. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Penelope adjusted to ranch life. Mrs. Winters proved to be a demanding but patient teacher, showing her how to manage the massive kitchen, plan meals for the always hungry ranch hands, and keep the large house clean and orderly. Men notice dirt about as much as a blind mule, Mrs. Winters told her during their first lesson in housekeeping. But that doesn't mean we let it accumulate. A clean house means a healthy household. Penelope learned to rise before dawn to start breakfast for the hands, who began their day at first light. She mastered the art of baking bread in the temperamental oven, figured out how to stretch ingredients when supplies ran low, and developed a system for washing the mountain of dishes that accumulated after each meal. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of the city lady in their midst, warmed to her quickly when they discovered her willingness to work hard and her genuine interest in their stories. Emmett, the oldest hand, took a grandfatherly interest in her education, often stopping by the kitchen to explain some aspect of ranch operations she didn't understand. "Boss is different with you around," he commented one afternoon as she served him coffee on the back porch. "More settled like." "I don't know what you mean," Penelope replied, feeling her cheeks warm, Emmett's weathered face creased in a knowing smile. "Course you don't," he said, sipping his coffee. "Neither does he, most likely." Zach himself remained something of a mystery to Penelope. He was unfailingly polite, asking after her comfort and occasionally bringing her wildflowers or an interesting stone he'd found on his rides around the property. But he maintained a careful distance, often eating quickly and retiring to his office to work on ranch accounts in the evenings. Nevertheless, Penelope found herself watching for his return each day, enjoying the way his face lit up when he saw her, even if the expression was quickly masked by his habitual reserve. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Penelope was sitting on the front porch swing after dinner, enjoying the cooler air and the spectacular sunset painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The sound of boots on the porch steps made her look up to find Zach approaching, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Thought you might like some company," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Thank you," she replied, moving over to make room for him on the swing. He sat beside her, careful to leave a respectable distance between them. For a while, they simply watched the sunset in companionable silence, the gentle creaking of the swing the only sound. "Mrs. Winters says you're a quick study," Zach said finally. "She's impressed with how much you've learned." Penelope smiled, pleased by the praise. "She's an excellent teacher, if somewhat intimidating at times." "She had to be tough to survive out here," Zach agreed. "Came west with her husband 30 years ago, lost him to a Comanche raid, raised 3 children on her own. Now her youngest is having a baby and she finally gets to be a grandmother. I'll miss her when she goes," Penelope admitted, "but I understand why she's leaving." Zach nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the last rays of sun were disappearing. Family is important, worth sacrificing for. Something in his tone made Penelope wonder if he was thinking of his sister, of the responsibility he had shouldered at such a young age. "You've done well by Rachel," she said softly. "She adores you." A small smile curved his lips. "She's easy to adore in return." He glanced at Penelope, his expression turning more serious. "Have you given any more thought to your land?" The question caught her off guard. "Some," she admitted. "I rode out to see it last week with Emmett. It's lovely, the view of the creek, the meadow." She paused, gathering her courage. "I've been thinking that I might like to build there eventually, not right away, but someday." Something flickered in Zach's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or another emotion she couldn't quite name. "It's good land for a home," he said carefully, "and having neighbors would be nice." Penelope smiled at his understatement. "Very diplomatic of you." "I mean it," Zach insisted, turning to face her more fully. "I've been thinking, too, about your situation. If you decide to build there, I could help. My men and I mean, we built this house and the barns. It wouldn't be any trouble to help with yours." Touched by his offer, Penelope impulsively reached out to cover his hand with hers. "That's very kind of you." Zach looked down at their hands, then back up to her face, his expression unreadable in the gathering twilight. For a moment, Penelope thought he might say something more, might even lean closer. But then he gently withdrew his hand and stood, breaking the fragile connection between them. "It's getting dark," he said, his voice slightly rough. "I should check on the horses before turning in." "Of course," Penelope murmured, trying to hide her disappointment. Good night, Zach. He hesitated at the top of the steps, looking back at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Good night, Penelope. As she watched him walk toward the barn, silhouetted against the darkening sky, Penelope acknowledged the truth she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Zachary Tucker, a man who had shown her nothing but kindness, but had given no indication that he saw her as anything more than an employee in need of protection. Foolish heart, she whispered to herself as she gathered the empty coffee cups and went inside. Twice in one lifetime is too much to ask. But as she prepared for bed that night, Penelope couldn't help wondering if perhaps, just once, life might surprise her with joy instead of sorrow. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, a rare autumn rain bringing welcome moisture to the parched land. Penelope rose at her usual early hour to find Mrs. Winters already at work in the kitchen. Weather like this, the men will want a hearty breakfast, the older woman said by way of greeting. Start the biscuits while I see to the bacon. As they worked side by side, Penelope sensed something was on Mrs. Winters' mind. Sure enough, as the biscuits went into the oven, the housekeeper fixed her with a direct gaze. My daughter's letter came yesterday, she said. The baby's coming sooner than expected. I'll need to leave at the end of the week, not the end of the month as we planned. Penelope's heart sank. Though she felt confident in most of her duties by now, the thought of losing Mrs. Winters' guidance so soon was daunting. Of course you must go, she said quickly. Don't worry about me, I'll manage, Mrs. Winters nodded, seemingly satisfied with this response. You're more capable than you give yourself credit for, but there's something else we need to discuss. She lowered her voice, though there was no one else in the house to hear. Your position here. My position, Penelope echoed, confused. Is there a problem with my work? Not the work, girl, the situation. Mrs. Winters sighed, turning the bacon with practiced efficiency. A young, unmarried woman living under the same roof as a bachelor, even with a house full of hands nearby. People will talk. Penelope felt her cheeks flush. I hadn't considered that aspect. Most folks around here know Zach Tucker is as honorable as they come, Mrs. Winters continued. But even so, it ain't proper. It was different with me. I'm old enough to be his mother, and everyone knows it. But you, she gave Penelope a significant look. Well, you're not, are you? What are you suggesting? Penelope asked, her stomach tightening with anxiety. That I shouldn't stay. I'm suggesting, Mrs. Winters said carefully, that you and the boss need to come to an understanding about how this arrangement will work once I'm gone, for both your reputations. Before Penelope could respond, the back door opened, and several ranch hands filed in, stomping mud from their boots and bringing with them the smell of rain and horses. The conversation was necessarily shelved as breakfast service began, but Mrs. Winters' words echoed in Penelope's mind throughout the morning. She was still pondering the problem when Zach appeared in the kitchen doorway just before noon, rainwater dripping from his slicker. Mrs. Winters, Penelope, he greeted them, removing his hat. Smells good in here. Beef stew, Mrs. Winters replied. Ready in 10 minutes. You're early. Rain's coming down harder. Called the men in early. He hesitated, then added, Mrs. Winters, could I have a word with you in my office about your travel arrangements? The housekeeper nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. Penelope can watch the stew, won't be but a minute. As they left the kitchen, Penelope stirred the bubbling pot, trying not to speculate about their conversation. Had Mrs. Winters already spoken to Zach about her concerns? What solution would they propose? When they returned a few minutes later, Mrs. Winters looked satisfied while Zach seemed slightly flustered, color high on his cheekbones. Everything all right? Penelope asked, trying to sound casual. Fine, Zach replied quickly, just finalizing details for Mrs. Winters' departure. She'll be leaving Saturday morning. I'll drive her to town myself. Mrs. Winters shot him a pointed look that Penelope couldn't interpret. The boss has something he'd like to discuss with you after supper, she said. In the meantime, that stew needs another pinch of salt. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of activity, with Penelope's mind continually returning to Mrs. Winters' warning and the mysterious conversations scheduled for after supper. By the time the evening meal was served, cleared, and the kitchen set to rights, her nerves were stretched thin with anticipation. "He's waiting for you in the parlor," Mrs. Winters said, shooing her out of the kitchen. "Go on now, and remember what I told you about being practical." Confused by this cryptic advice, Penelope made her way to the parlor, smoothing her hair and straightening her apron out of nervous habit. She found Zach standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames with an intensity that suggested his thoughts were far away. "You wanted to speak with me?" she asked softly. Zach turned, startled from his reverie. "Yes, please sit down." He gestured to one of the comfortable armchairs near the fire. Penelope sat, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from fidgeting. Zach remained standing, his posture tense. "Mrs. Winters brought something to my attention today," he began, his voice carefully measured. "A matter of propriety regarding my position here after she leaves," Penelope supplied, relieved that the topic was out in the open. "Yes." Zach ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "It hadn't occurred to me how it might look, but she's right. A young widow living in the house with a bachelor, even with the hands nearby, it could damage your reputation." "I see," Penelope said, her heart sinking. "If you think it best that I leave—" "No," Zach interrupted, his voice sharper than she'd ever heard it. He took a breath, visibly collecting himself. "That is, I don't want you to leave, unless you want to, of course." "I don't," Penelope admitted, holding his gaze. "I've come to care for this place and the people here." Something shifted in Zach's expression, a softening, a glimpse of vulnerability beneath his usual reserve. "I've been thinking about this all day," he said, moving to sit in the chair opposite hers. "And I believe I have a solution if you're willing to hear it, of course." Zach leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, hands clasped before him. "Your land, the parcel your husband purchased." "It borders my property, as you know." Penelope nodded, uncertain where this was leading. "I've been considering expanding the ranch," Zach continued. "Adding more grazing land for a larger herd. Your property would be ideal for that purpose." Disappointment washed over Penelope. He wanted to buy her land. Was this his way of sending her away while appearing generous? "I see," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You want to purchase my property?" "No," Zach said quickly. "That's not what I'm proposing." He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. "I'm proposing a merger." "A merger?" Penelope repeated, confused. "I don't understand." Zach's eyes held hers, intense and earnest. "A marriage, Penelope. I'm proposing marriage." Shock rendered her momentarily speechless. Of all the solutions she had imagined, this had not been among them. "You want to marry me for my land?" she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Zach's expression fell. "No, that's not." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "I'm making a mess of this. Let me start again." He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Penelope Lawson, from the moment I saw you at that stagecoach station, something in me recognized something in you. I didn't understand it then, and I'm not sure I fully understand it now, but I know that these past weeks with you here have been the happiest of my life." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest as she stared into his earnest blue eyes. "Zach, please let me finish," he urged. "I know it's sudden. I know you're still grieving your husband. I'm not asking for. That is, it could be a marriage in name only at first. To protect your reputation while you continue working here. But I hope, in time, you might come to feel for me what I've come to feel for you." "And what is that?" Penelope asked softly, needing to hear the words. Zach's thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "I believe I'm falling in love with you, Penelope, and the thought of you leaving, of not seeing you every day, I can't bear it." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, spilling over before she could blink them back. Zach's face fell, his grip on her hands loosening. "I've upset you," he said, starting to pull away. "Forgive me, it was too soon." "No," Penelope said quickly, holding onto his hands. "These aren't tears of sorrow, Zach. I never expected to feel this way again, to care for someone as I'm coming to care for you." Hope dawned in his eyes. "Does that mean—" "It means I accept your proposal," Penelope said, a smile breaking through her tears. "Though I think we should get to know each other better before we make any permanent decisions." Relief and joy transformed Zach's face. With gentle reverence, he raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "We have all the time in the world," he promised. "There is one condition," Penelope added, suddenly serious. "Anything," Zach vowed. "I want us to build a house on my land on Henry's land." Not right away, but eventually. She saw confusion in his eyes and hurried to explain. "Not to live in ourselves, but as a tribute to him, a place for someone else who needs a fresh start the way I did." Understanding dawned in Zach's expression, followed by admiration. "I think that's a fine idea," he said softly. "A lasting memorial that would truly honor him." Impulsively, Penelope leaned forward and pressed her lips to Zach's in a brief, sweet kiss. His surprise quickly gave way to tenderness as he returned the kiss, one hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite care. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Zach's eyes were alight with a joy that matched the warmth spreading through Penelope's chest. "I should probably speak with the Reverend in town," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. "Before Mrs. Winters leaves on Saturday." "So soon?" Penelope asked, though the idea didn't alarm her as much as it perhaps should have. "No sense in waiting once you're sure," Zach replied, echoing his words from their first meeting. "Unless you'd prefer a longer engagement," Penelope considered this, weighing propriety against the certainty she felt in her heart. "A small ceremony before Mrs. Winters leaves," she decided. "And then perhaps a larger celebration later, when we've had time to plan." Zach nodded, clearly pleased with this solution. "I'll ride into town first thing tomorrow to speak with Reverend Gardner and to tell Rachel, of course." "She'll be pleased, I think," Penelope said with a smile, recalling Rachel's not-so-subtle hints about her brother needing a woman's touch. "Pleased, she'll be ecstatic," Zach laughed. "She's been trying to marry me off for years." A thought occurred to Penelope, sobering her slightly. "What about the ranch hands? Will they accept me as your wife?" "They already respect you," Zach assured her, "and they want to see me happy. We'll be fine." He squeezed her hands gently. "Are you sure about this, Penelope? I don't want you to feel pressured." Penelope looked into his eyes, seeing the concern there, the genuine care for her well-being that had been evident from their first meeting. In that moment, she knew with certainty that while this wasn't the future she had imagined when she'd boarded the stagecoach to Silver Creek, it was a future filled with promise and joy. "I'm sure," she said simply, and was rewarded with a smile that warmed her to her core. 2 days later, on a crisp autumn morning, Penelope stood in Rachel's guest room, allowing her soon-to-be sister-in-law to arrange a small cluster of wildflowers in her hair. "There," Rachel said, stepping back to admire her work. "Simple but elegant. Zach won't be able to take his eyes off you." Penelope smoothed the skirt of her best dress, a deep blue that Rachel had insisted brought out the green of her eyes. It wasn't a traditional bridal gown, but it was clean and pretty, and the look on Zach's face when she'd worn it to dinner the previous evening had been all the reassurance she needed that it would do. "I still can't believe this is happening," she admitted, turning to face Rachel. "A month ago, I was a grieving widow alone at a stagecoach station, and now you're about to marry the best man in the county," Rachel finished for her, squeezing her hands. "Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Winters' entrance. The housekeeper had been stunned by the news of their engagement, but had quickly rallied, throwing herself into preparations for a small wedding with remarkable enthusiasm. "It's time," she announced, her usual brisk manner softened by the occasion. "The Reverend's ready, and that brother of yours is wearing a path in my parlor floor with his pacing." Rachel laughed. "That sounds like Zach, impatient as always." The three women made their way downstairs to the boarding house parlor, where Reverend Gardner waited with Zach and Emmett, who had been honored and flustered in equal measure when Zach asked him to stand as his witness. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. As Penelope spoke her vows, looking into Zach's steady blue eyes, she felt a sense of rightness that transcended the unusual circumstances of their courtship. This was not the future she had planned, but standing here, promising to share her life with this good, honorable man, she couldn't imagine wanting anything else. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Zach's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a beginning rather than an ending. The small wedding breakfast that followed was a joyful affair, with Rachel and Mrs. Winters outdoing themselves despite the short notice. As they prepared to leave for the ranch, their home now, Penelope reminded herself with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. Rachel pulled her aside for a final embrace. "Welcome to the family, sister," she whispered. "Take care of him, he's been alone too long." "I will," Penelope promised, returning the hug. "And you'll visit soon. Try and keep me away," Rachel laughed. "Someone has to make sure my brother is treating you right." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both Penelope and Zach lost in their own thoughts about the momentous step they had taken. As they approached the house, Penelope was surprised to see the ranch hands gathered in the yard, many holding their hats respectfully. "What's this?" she asked as Zach helped her down from the wagon. "A welcome," he replied with a smile. "Their idea, not mine." Emmett stepped forward, looking slightly uncomfortable in his Sunday best. "On behalf of all the boys, Mrs. Tucker," he said, the new name sending a thrill through Penelope, "we wanted to wish you and the boss all the happiness in the world." "Thank you, Emmett," Penelope said, touched by the gesture. "And please, all of you, I'm still Penelope. Nothing has to change in how the ranch operates." "Begging your pardon, madam," one of the younger hands called out, "but things are already changing for the better since you came." "Boss actually smiles now." Good-natured laughter rippled through the group as Zach's ears reddened. "All right, that's enough," he said, though his tone held no real rebuke. "Don't you all have work to do?" The men dispersed, still chuckling, leaving Zach and Penelope alone at the foot of the porch steps. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the reality of their new relationship settling around them like the golden autumn light. "Welcome home, Mrs. Tucker," Zach said softly, offering her his arm. "Thank you, Mr. Tucker," Penelope replied, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. Together, they climbed the steps and crossed the threshold into their shared future. The adjustment to married life was both easier and more challenging than Penelope had anticipated. On one hand, the practical aspects of running the household continued much as before, with the added benefit of Mrs. Winters' final days of guidance before her departure for California. On the other hand, the shift in her relationship with Zach introduced a new layer of complexity to their interactions. True to his word, Zach made no demands on her as a wife beyond her existing duties as housekeeper. He had moved his personal belongings from the master bedroom to one of the guest rooms, insisting that she take the larger room for herself. "Until you're ready," he had said simply, and Penelope had been both relieved and touched by his consideration. Yet there was an undeniable tension between them now, a sweet, anticipatory awareness that colored every shared meal, every casual conversation, every accidental brush of hands. Penelope found herself noticing things about Zach she had overlooked before. The way sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair, the tiny scar at the corner of his mouth that deepened when he smiled, the grace of his hands as he worked with the horses. For his part, Zach seemed determined to court her properly, despite the fact that they were already married. He brought her wildflowers from his rides around the property, sat with her on the porch swing in the evenings, and shared stories of his childhood that made her laugh until tears came to her eyes. A week after their wedding, as they sat together after supper watching the sunset from the porch, Zach turned to her with an expression of sudden decision. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice careful, "about your land, about Henry's land." Penelope tensed slightly, uncertain where this was leading. "What about it?" "I rode out there yesterday to get a better sense of the lay of the land. There's a small rise near the creek that would be perfect for a house. Good drainage, protected from the north wind, with a view of both the creek and the mountains." Penelope studied his face, trying to understand his intention. "You've been thinking about the memorial house we discussed," Zach nodded, his expression earnest. "I think we should start planning it now, even if we don't build until spring. That way we can order materials gradually, have everything ready when the weather turns." Warmth bloomed in Penelope's chest at this tangible evidence of his support for her wishes. That's a wonderful idea. But won't it be expensive? I have Henry's money, of course, but we're partners now, Zach interrupted gently. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is yours. His lips quirked in a small smile. I may be old-fashioned, but I believe a husband should provide for his wife, not the other way around. Partners, Penelope repeated, liking the sound of it. Then perhaps we should consider it our first joint venture. The smile that lit Zach's face was worth any cost. I'd like that, he said softly, very much. Impulsively, Penelope leaned over and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Thank you for understanding why this is important to me. Zach caught her hand as she began to pull away, his fingers warm around hers. Henry was a lucky man, he said, his voice low. And so am I. The moment hung between them, fragile and precious. Penelope's heart raced as Zach's gaze dropped to her lips, his intention clear in the slight forward tilt of his body. But before he could close the distance between them, the sound of hoofbeats in the yard broke the spell. One of the hands rode up, touching his hat respectfully. Sorry to interrupt, boss, but there's trouble with the new bull in the north pasture. Broke through the fence and is heading for Wilson's property. Zach sighed, reluctantly releasing Penelope's hand. I'll be right there. He turned back to her, regret evident in his expression. I'm sorry, duty calls. Go, she urged him, managing a smile despite her disappointment. I'll be here when you get back. It was nearly midnight when Zach finally returned, mud-splattered and exhausted. Penelope, who had waited up despite his insistence that she shouldn't, met him at the door with a cup of hot coffee and a plate of food she'd kept warm in the oven. You didn't have to wait up, he said, though gratitude shone in his tired eyes. That's what partners do, she replied simply, ushering him to the kitchen table. Sit, eat, then sleep. As she turned to go, Zach caught her wrist, his touch gentle despite his evident fatigue. Penelope, he said, his voice rough with emotion, thank you. She smiled, allowing herself to brush a lock of hair from his forehead in a gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. You're welcome, husband. The word hung in the air between them, new and significant. Zach's eyes darkened, and for a moment Penelope thought he might pull her closer. But then he released her wrist with a sigh. Good night, wife, he murmured, the word a caress. Good night, she whispered back and left him to his meal, her heart full and her steps lighter than they had any right to be after such a long day. As autumn deepened, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hint of frost to the mornings, life at Tucker Ranch settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural to Penelope. She managed the household with growing confidence, earning the respect of the ranch hands and the grudging admiration of the neighboring ranchers' wives, who initially viewed her with suspicion. Her relationship with Zach continued to evolve, their initial caution gradually giving way to a comfortable intimacy that stopped just short of physical consummation. They shared meals, conversations, and increasingly, touches a hand on a shoulder, fingers intertwined while walking, a brief kiss goodnight that grew longer and more lingering as the weeks passed. One crisp November morning, Penelope woke to find a small package on her bedside table, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Attached was a note in Zach's distinctive handwriting. Happy birthday, Z. Surprised that he had remembered the date she had mentioned only in passing weeks earlier, Penelope unwrapped the package with curious fingers. Inside was a small wooden box, exquisitely carved with a pattern of wildflowers around the edges. When she opened it, a soft melody began to play a tune she recognized as Beautiful Dreamer, one she had hummed often while working in the kitchen. Tears pricked at her eyes as she traced the delicate carving with her fingertips. How long had this taken him to make? When had he found the time, with all his responsibilities on the ranch, still in her nightdress and wrapper, she padded down the hallway to Zach's room, knocking softly on the door. There was no answer. He had likely already gone out to start the day's work. Disappointed but determined to thank him properly, Penelope returned to her room to dress for the day. As she went about her morning routine, supervising breakfast for the hands and beginning preparations for dinner, Penelope kept an eye out for Zach, but he didn't appear at the usual times. It wasn't until mid-morning, as she was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, that Emmett approached her. "Boss asked me to give you this," he said, handing her a folded note. "Said to tell you he's sorry he couldn't deliver it himself, but he had business in town." Curious, Penelope unfolded the paper to find another brief message. "Meet me at sunset at your land. Bring a warm coat. Z." Her pulse quickened at the mysterious invitation. What was Zach planning? And why at her land, which they had visited several times to discuss the memorial house, but had not yet begun to develop? The day seemed to crawl by as Penelope completed her chores with half her mind on the evening to come. When the hands came in for dinner, Emmett informed her that Zach had sent word he wouldn't be back until later, confirming her suspicion that whatever he had planned was significant enough to keep him away all day. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Penelope saddled the mare she now considered her own and rode out toward Henry's land. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, but the sky was clear, painted in spectacular shades of orange and pink as the sun sank lower. As she crested the small rise Zach had identified as the ideal building site, Penelope gasped in surprise. A small cabin stood where there had been only open meadow before, not the full house they had discussed for the memorial, but a simple, one-room structure with a covered porch and a stone chimney from which smoke curled invitingly. Zach stood on the porch, watching her approach with an expression she couldn't quite read from a distance. As she dismounted and tied her horse beside his, he came down the steps to meet her. "Happy birthday," he said simply, though his eyes betrayed his nervousness. "Do you like it?" "You built this?" Penelope asked, astonished. "When? How? I've been working on it for weeks, with help from some of the hands when they could be spared," Zach explained. "It's not the full house we planned that will still come in the spring, but I thought you might like a place that was truly yours. Somewhere you could come to think or remember, or just be alone if you needed it." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes as the full meaning of his gift registered. Not only had he remembered her birthday and created something beautiful with his own hands, but he had also given her something far more precious, an acknowledgement of her need for independence, for a space that belonged to her alone, even as she built a life with him. "It's perfect," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "Will you show me inside?" The interior was simple but thoughtfully arranged, with a small stone fireplace, a comfortable-looking chair, a narrow bed, and a table with 2 chairs by the single window. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the rustic furnishings. "It's not much," Zach said, watching her face as she took in the details, "but it's solid. It'll keep out the weather and provide a place to rest if you're out this way." "Did you make the furniture too?" Penelope asked, running her hand over the smooth surface of the table. Zach nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "Most of it. The chair by the fire came from town. I wanted you to have at least one truly comfortable seat." Penelope moved to the window, looking out at the view of the creek and the distant mountains, now silhouetted against the darkening sky. "It's beautiful, Zach, more than I could have imagined." "There's one more thing," he said, moving to stand beside her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small leather pouch. "This is the real reason I was in town today." Curious, Penelope accepted the pouch and emptied its contents into her palm. A ring gleamed in the firelight, a simple band of gold set with a small but perfect emerald. "I know we're already married," Zach said softly, "but it didn't seem right that you didn't have a ring. The jeweler said the green stone would match your eyes." Penelope looked up at him, her heart so full she could barely speak. "It's beautiful," she managed finally. "Will you put it on for me?" Zach took the ring from her palm, his fingers warm against her skin. With gentle reverence, he slid the band onto her finger, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. "I love you, Penelope Tucker," he said, his voice low and fervent. "I know it hasn't been long, and I know our beginning was unusual, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The words she had been waiting to hear, the confirmation of what she had already come to believe through his actions rather than his words, broke the last of Penelope's reservations. I love you too, she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. And I'm ready, Zach. Ready to be your wife in every way. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a joy so pure it transformed his features. Are you sure? In answer, Penelope rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, pouring all the love and certainty she felt into the kiss. Zach responded with equal fervor, his arms encircling her waist and drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Zach rested his forehead against hers. I brought food, he said with a small, rueful laugh. A picnic supper. I thought we would eat and talk, and I would bring you home before it got too late. Penelope smiled, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. Or we could stay, she suggested softly. It is my cabin, after all. The look in Zach's eyes was worth any amount of raised eyebrows or gossip they might face when they returned to the ranch the next morning. Yes, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. It is. That night, in the small cabin Zach had built with his own hands, Penelope discovered what it meant to be truly loved not just with words or gestures, but with a physical tenderness that matched the care he had shown her from their first meeting. And as they lay together afterward, watching the fire burn low in the hearth, she knew that she had found something precious and rare. A second chance at happiness, a love built on mutual respect and understanding rather than fleeting passion or convenience. What are you thinking? Zach murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Penelope smiled, nestling closer to his warmth. I'm thinking about that day at the stagecoach station, how lost I felt, how certain I was that my life was over. She looked up at him, marveling at the twist of fate that had brought them together. And then you came along, picked up my trunk, and told me I was coming home. Best decision I ever made, Zach said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Mine too, Penelope agreed, and knew in her heart it was true. Spring came early that year, bringing with it new life and renewed purpose. As the land awakened from its winter slumber, so too did the Tucker Ranch, buzzing with activity as cattle were moved to fresh pastures and preparations began for the annual roundup. For Penelope, now 5 months into her marriage and fully settled in her role as Zach's wife and partner, the changing season brought both joy and reflection. The anniversary of Henry's death approached, a date she had marked in her mental calendar with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the life that had been cut short, gratitude for the unexpected path that had led her to her current happiness. One warm April morning, as she and Zach sat on the porch enjoying a rare moment of leisure before the day's work began, she broached the subject that had been on her mind. I've been thinking about the memorial house, she said, watching a pair of bluebirds flit around the oak tree in the yard. It's nearly a year since Henry died. I'd like to start building soon if you still think it's a good idea. Zach reached for her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the months of their marriage. Of course it's a good idea. I've already ordered most of the lumber. It should arrive next week. Surprise and pleasure washed over Penelope. You didn't tell me, wanted it to be a surprise, Zach admitted with a smile. I've been working on the plans too, thought we might make it a bit bigger than we originally discussed, 2 bedrooms instead of 1. More practical for a family. The notion of a family living in the house Henry had envisioned brought tears to Penelope's eyes, happy tears, she realized with some amazement. That's perfect, she agreed. A place where someone can start fresh, just as I did. Zach's expression grew more serious. Actually, I've been thinking about who might live there once it's built. Oh, Penelope looked at him curiously. Do you have someone in mind? Emmett's nephew is coming out from Tennessee next month, Zach explained. Young fellow just married. Emmett says he's a hard worker and his wife is expecting their first child in the fall. They'll need a place to stay, and I thought it might be fitting. Penelope considered this, turning the idea over in her mind. A young family just starting out, bringing new life to the land Henry had purchased with such hope for the future. It seemed right, somehow a continuation rather than an ending. I think that would be wonderful, she said finally. Henry would have approved, I think. He always talked about wanting children. Zach's hand tightened briefly around hers. Speaking of children, He hesitated, a rare uncertainty in his expression. Penelope felt her heart skip a beat. Yes, I've been meaning to ask how you feel about, that is, if you might want. He took a breath, then tried again. Would you consider having a family of our own someday? Not right away if you're not ready, but the question caught Penelope off guard, though perhaps it shouldn't have. They had never explicitly discussed children, though their increasing physical intimacy certainly made the possibility real. I would like that, she said softly, watching joy bloom across his face. Very much. What she didn't tell him not yet was that someday might be sooner than he anticipated. She had missed her monthly courses twice now, and though she hadn't confirmed her suspicions with the doctor in town, the tender fullness of her breasts and the occasional wave of nausea in the mornings suggested that their family might already have begun. But that news could wait a little longer, she decided. Today was for remembering the past and planning for the future, a future that stretched before them like the vast Texas sky, full of promise and possibility. Zach brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles just above the emerald ring that now felt as much a part of her as her own skin. I love you, Penelope Tucker, he said simply. And I love you, she replied, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, partners in every sense of the word. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the porch and warming the air around them, Penelope found herself filled with a profound sense of gratitude. For the twist of fate that had brought her to Silver Creek, for the kindness of strangers who had become family, for the man beside her who had seen her at her lowest moment and offered not pity but respect and eventually love. Life had taken an unexpected turn, bringing sorrow and joy in equal measure. But sitting here, with Zach's hand in hers and their future stretching out before them, Penelope knew she wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had led her home.